Hello everyone. Welcome to this digital learning platform of Department of College Education, Karnataka LMS. Today in this video, let us take up the discussion of analysis of the act second of the play As You Like It, written by William Shakespeare. In the last video, we had a discussion of act 1, analysis of the act 1. There we recounted the plot line and we saw that the act 1 in the play sets a foreground to the discussion of uh, the theme of Shakespeare. In the act 1 we are introduced to setting of Duke Ferdinand's court and the setting of the Forest of Arden. We are also introduced to so many binaries or contrasts between the court life and the country life or the pastoral life, and also the contrast between wickedness and wisdom, or the good nature of human beings and the bad one. Thus, we find it also introduces the different sorts of love, pure love and romantic love, practical love. That those concepts are introduced, and all the characters, major characters of the play, are introduced in the first act. Thus, we are given a beginning in the act one as usual. When come to the act second, we have seen a capsule summary in earlier videos. In act second, Orlando learns over Oliver's plot. It is through Adam he comes to know about Oliver's plan to kill him. That was learned when he came to know after the fight with Charles, and then because of the advice he received from Adam, he flees to Arden, to the forest of Arden, along with Adam. Then we notice Duke Frederick banishes Rosalind once he came to know that Rosalind supported her enemy's son, that is Orlando. She therefore goes in exile from the court. Along with her, it is Celia and a Touchstone accompany. Right? We see she settles down in the forest of Arden, taking the help of a shepherd named Corin, and both disguise themselves. That is, Rosalind as a young man Ganymede, and Celia as her shepherdess, his shepherdess sister Aliena. Shepherdess sister named Aliena. Touchstone is the court fool who accompanies them to the forest of Arden. This is the development that we have seen in capsule summary in Act 2nd. In this part of the discussion, let us make a detailed analysis of the Act 2nd. Yeah, let's move on to Scene 1. Look at the Scene 1, which is very important scene in Act 2nd, that it introduces the Forest of Arden, a clear picture of the Forest of Arden. Along with it presents a kind of debate about the pastoral life in contrast with that of the court life. We see it makes a kind of a review of the pastoral life or the country life, because it questions the pastoral life on the one hand, and also it highlights the merits of it. The question of the pastoral life appears to be superior to that of city, because the very act carries a famous line of Shakespeare uh, pronounced through Duke Senior, who says, "Our life, exempt from public haunt, finds tongue in trees, books in the running brooks, sermon in stones, and good in everything." The last phrase, good in everything, used in the line number 16 and 17 of second act, scene 1, is very interesting, because the good in everything says Shakespeare's own perception of the country life, pastoral life, which appears good in everything. For them, Sermons are in stones, or the books in the running brooks, the water running brooks, and the tongues. What we say, we find tongues in trees, right? It is in the trees that they find the language, the inspiration. Thus, through Duke Senior, Shakespeare presents that pleasant side of pastoral life, or even the forest life. But it is also noteworthy here that Duke Senior also points out to the difficulties in the forest of Arden. Though it is free from all sort of dangers that he can see in the court, it has different kind of danger. Maybe the dangers from wildlife or animals. And their greatest worry is here is of the cold winter wind, that they have to bear that atrocious weather. Thus, the woods provide Duke Senior everything he wants, that he can find that peace which is not there in that place. He can find his spiritual education, edification of himself, which is not possible in the court life for him. But it has some other loopholes also. Nevertheless, he considers that it is the best one. Therefore, he concludes in that line as good in everything. Then we find Duke in this scene suggests others to hunt some deer, and he cannot help it, but he only mourn the fate of the deer. But interesting thing is that here we find the entry of a melancholy lord named Jacques, right? The lord who is whose name is Jacques, who has a different observation, who declares that death of a deer, killing of a hunting of a deer is assertion. It's similar to that of Duke Frederick usurping or dethroning Duke Senior. Here the hunters usurp the forest land by dethroning the wildlife of that place. Look at the observation, probably for 5 centuries before, what the present environmentalists make or think of the preservation of wildlife. That kind of attitude was presented through Jacques. He makes a philosophy or presents a philosophy of nature by giving that man's usurping of natural world. Thus, we see nature is good in every place, but it also satirizes the commonplace we've held by many, and it is less practical, though he claims it profound. Because sometimes it is less practical because we find nature has also some difficulties, as he mentioned there, the atrocious weather, for example, settling in the forest, for example, such things. But also we find man's attitude towards nature, that the way he imposes his will on nature is presented through Jacques' observation of the man killing deer. Thus we find the scene 1 is one of the important scenes in the uh, act 2. And move on to scene 2 and 3, that sets in the court of that goes back to the court of Ferdinand. Duke Ferdinand decides to send Oliver to such Celia because he finds the reason behind the flight of Rosalind and Celia is Orlando, because he considers that Orlando's role is possible in in the act, because both of them, that is Rosalind and Celia, admired his valor in the fight. Then this scene is contrast with the previous scene, because in the previous scene we find the atmosphere, the beauty of the forest of Arden, the merit of the forest of Arden is described. It was in tranquility, it was in peaceful atmosphere, which actually soothed, or a kind of rejuvenating thing for the disturbed Duke Senior. But we find in this act again that tranquility is in contrast with the tension of the court. Ferdinand is worried about the missing daughter, and therefore he again decides to do further act in relation to that. The goodness of human being is personified in Adam in this act, because who comes to help particularly who comes to the rescue of Orlando, who is in the threat of his brother's hatred. Because Oliver had planned to destroy the house of Orlando along with killing him. He already tried it through Charles to injure in the first act. Now in the second act, Adam tells Orlando that the danger is ahead. And this timely advice given to Orlando makes him save his life, and he decides to move to the forest with Adam. Thus, with the shifting of Duke Senior in the first act, and again we see the shifting of Rosalind, and now Orlando, we see almost all the characters shifted, transferred their setting to that of the Forest of Arden. Thus, the Forest of Arden becomes the center of discussion now. Complete discussion, complete setting of the play shifts to Forest of Arden. Orlando also moves with Adam, that we have to identify, because Orlando here shows this is care for Adam, because he never wanted to leave Adam there. Though Adam, who was the servant of his father, Roland de Bois, later became the servant of the next inheritor, that is Oliver, still Orlando brings Adam, the aged Adam, with him in order to care him. Thus, the court life ultimately shifts completely from that of to from that court-centered setting to that of the country life, that is the Forest of Arden. Yes, in the scene number 4, we have further discussion of that town life versus country life. It is Touchstone who does it, because we see Rosalind, Celia, and Touchstone arrive safe at the Forest of Arden, in the Forest of Arden, and they take down the help. They take the help of shepherd named Corin, and also old another shepherd named young Corin and Silvius. Both of them support them to buy a piece of land and start their pastoral life in the forest. Thus, they settle down there. So she makes a financial transaction by buying a land there, because she comes to know through Corin that Corin's master, was selling some property, and she buys that and settles down in the pastoral world. This is the second instance that a disturbed soul in the play takes the shelter of that pastoral, that tranquil, peaceful world of the Forest of Arden. It was Duke Senior in the earlier finds the shelter and the peace and tranquility of the place, and now it is Rosalind who takes that shelter after getting disturbed from the court life. Thus, we find the pastoral life, or the Forest of Arden in the in the play acts as a kind of palliative to the disturbed mindset, the disturbed court life. And we see in the act again, we come to know something about Silvius' love of Phoebe. That means it contributes to the pastoral love. In the pastoral world as setting, we find the love between Silvius and Phoebe that contrasts us with the love of other pairs, and the love of pastoral setting, or love of Silvius and Phoebe. Then we find another interesting thing is looking at this. Touchstone makes a discussion of the concept love. He satirizes love. He condemns that, because we find for Touchstone, he's of the sort that he practical mindset. So he takes that advantage of that advantage of condemning the romantic love. We find some of the foolish things that he did when he was previously in love. Touchstone recalls all that, and thereby he uh, criticizes the concept love. He himself announces that he's a clown, but uh, but he behaving as a clown or a fool um, follows or reflects Shakespeare's persona, represents his own personality, and makes a question of the loopholes of the world, satirizes the world. Thus, the scene number 4 introduces a touchstone discussion of town life versus country life with reason, and meanwhile, Rosalind settling in the forest of Arden completely, and also introducing of introduction to that of pastoral love between Sylvius and Phoebe. Then, when we move on to the scene number 5, in the scene 5, we find Lord Amiens' song of pastoral sentiments. He addresses Jacques and other lords who are sitting around. He sings a song of the beauty of pastoral world and all that. As against Amiens, of course, Jacques tells Amiens to continue his song, but at the same time, he begins his melancholy notes. As against the opinions of Amiens, Jacques questions that very pastoral sentiment or settling somewhere, leaving the court in pastoral world, because he makes his own arguments and opposing views to Amiens by taking the example of Duke Senior himself or even all other lords who left their court life pleasant the pleasure life of the court and leading a difficult life at the forest. Thus, he continues his sullen perspective, even though using the comic notes of life, along with the comic notes, because we find the discussion of our Song of Amiens is in the comic sense. They're taking the pleasure of life in the forest, but he makes a very sullen perspective to it. So, thus, we find he hates the pastoral views of life, but he chooses to stay there. That is very ambiguous state of Jacques. He condemns the pastoral views of life by other lords, but he also chooses to stay there. It is even evident at the end of the play, as we saw in the earlier discussion, that he finally settles down in the forest itself. That is the ambiguous stand of Jacques, representing many who, in fact, fools behave so in the world. But Jacques is a melancholy lord here who thinks of the other side of the or the different attitude towards life. Anyhow, when we move on to scene number 6 and 7, in scene 6, we find with Orlando, the best of the court unites Duke Senior. But we also find on his way to the forest of Arden, Adam, old aged Adam, gets tired and he feels like he couldn't walk. But it was Orlando who cares him and who assures him providing food, who supports him walking ahead. Thus, we find Orlando's care for Adam. That means the good in Sir Roland D. Boyce, his father, is inherited by Orlando. That's why probably the name chosen, as I already told you, Orlando resembles Roland. That means he inherited that noble quality or noble character of Roland D. Boyce, while we find Oliver inherited only the properties, being the eldest son of Roland D. Boyce. Thus, inheritance of property is in contrast with that of inheritance of noble character or values in life. Thus, because this is highlighted even in the Oliver's attitude towards Adam. We saw the way he condemnedly pointed at Adam as an old fool or old being. Then you to go with him, like that somewhere he says in the earlier scenes. Thus, we find the contrast between the noble character of Orlando and the other side, that is Oliver's character. And when we come to the scene again, that this provides another interesting thing. When Duke Senior is in search of Jacques, that because he found Jacques was in little happy mood, and also Duke Senior finds his happiness in that melancholy Lord Jacques. That is interesting. Jacques is known for melancholy or sadness, but it is Duke Senior who finds his happiness in the presence of Jacques, who is finding or searching for Jacques in his absence. But Jacques then found, but he comes with an interesting thing that he met a person named Touchstone, and who is a fool, and he felt delighted by meeting that fool. Therefore, Jacques says he wished to be a fool to expose the world's abuses, because for a fool, it is no there is no restriction to have any there are no restrictions to expose the weaknesses of the world, or abuse the world, or lampoon the world. But for a other person, for a sane, for a decent person, it is difficult to be so. Therefore, the position of a fool is interesting. Therefore, even Shakespeare found his fool to make clever and witty statements of the world. That is even evident in the example of Touchstone, who, though titled as a clown or a fool, makes a very witty and clever observation of the world. And in fact, he is the one who exposes the foolishness of men rather than he himself being a fool. Thus, the fool in Shakespeare is interesting, as in the case of Touchstone. Then, the very important part of the play here is the concept, the talk, the speech of Jacques when he met Duke Senior, that his philosophy of life is he introduces that philosophy of 7 ages of man. He considers all the world as a um, all the world as a stage, and we are all actors there, and we have different roles to play, we have different parts to play. He considers that parts as seven, starting from infant to old age. There are different roles that we play, and in each one we have a certain distinct characteristics. Thus, the 7 ages of man is the philosophy of Shakespeare introduced to us. So, in that concept, we see in the first one, for example, he says, as in the age of an infant, or being an infant, we we as men in the stage of infant, as a child, we need the nursing, we need the support of others, because we cry, human baby cries and vomits in the nurse's arm, right? Later he starts going to school, that's the next stage. His shining face and carries a bag of books that we see. He goes to school where he is unwilling to go to school. He therefore, while going to school, he creeps like a snail slowly. Whereas in the that is the second act, right? In the third role, he becomes a lover, right? As a young lover, he sighs like a furnace and sings mournful songs praising the beauty of his beloved. That's the next stage. In the fourth stage is the stage of profession, a soldier. He appears attractive and he behaves like a leopard, right? He's quick tempered in matter of honor, right? He seeks the reputation there, and it's valor that's a credit to him here, right? He's not afraid of death. And danger also. He fights against that, and he fights for reputation. So, but we understand here that his reputation is lived. It's like a bubble, hollow like bubble, that we can see here. Then comes the middle age. That is the fifth stage. In the fifth stage, he judged the world. He is fat with a round and fleshly stomach as a result of eating chickens and a lot of food. And his beard is a formal, he has a beard of formal cut also in that stage. His eyes become harsh, and he becomes strict in his behavior. He uses the modern instances to support his arguments of wisdom. Then the sixth stage is of old age. Here a man becomes weak in health and thin in body. He loses that healthy condition. He wears slippers, spectacles, clothes of his youth, and we find now he become thin legs. He has thin legs, and his voice becomes unmanly, rough, and he pipes, whistles, all these things. He lisps like a child here. Once again, the man travels to the position of child. And the last role that he identifies in the seven age is extremely old person, where he is helpless, similar to that of a baby. He's toothless. and he's not able to hear, he's weak in eyesight, he's forgetful, he forgets the things. In fact, he loses control over all senses. He departs from the world thereafter, playing these roles in life. Thus, very brilliantly, Shakespeare presents that philosophy of life, identifying seven stages of life as seven ages of man. Thus, Shakespeare's brilliance of poetry is revealed in the scene here. That's why his act second in this play is known for this uh, seven ages of man, right? Thus we find the poem, the poetic skill of Shakespeare is also highlighted here in uh, this act. So anyhow, so thus we find that the growth of very well structured plot is seen in this act. The usage of brilliant poetry in the act second also reveals his mastery and comic genius, and the happenings in the act second set effective platform to the play to become a perfect plan in comedy, right? Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.